They had been married for 21 years when she noticed he started waking up earlier than usual. It wasn't sudden. There was no dramatic shift. No slammed doors, no late-night phone calls, no changes in passwords or cologne. Just him, slipping out of bed quietly before dawn, not wanting to wake her, and heading out into the backyard. At first, she thought nothing of it. Maybe he couldn't sleep. Maybe it was the coffee. He always drank too much of it late at night. But by the third week, she noticed that he wasn't just sitting out there. He was doing things, small, quiet things, pulling weeds, trimming hedges, watering plants that hadn't been alive in years. He started clearing a space in the far corner, the one they never touched because the soil was too hard, too rocky. Her name was Laura. His Greg. They lived in a small town on Long Island. Raised 2 kids, both now in college. Their house was modest, their arguments were rare, and their routines had long since solidified into something dependable. They weren't romantic anymore, not really, but they weren't unhappy either. Just still, like a photograph left in a frame too long. Laura didn't ask him why he was spending hours out back. She watched from the kitchen window most mornings, sipping her tea, wondering what had shifted. Sometimes he'd come in with dirt under his nails and not say a word. Sometimes he'd smile faintly and press a hand to her back as he passed. By May, he had dug out a full rectangle of earth, brought in new soil, measured the angles. She saw him making notes in a little notebook, the kind he used to keep in the glove compartment. One Saturday morning, she joined him. Didn't say anything at first, just brought out a second mug of coffee and sat on the old bench beneath the tree. He looked up once, met her eyes, and then went back to raking the ground smooth. "What are you planting?" she asked finally. "Not sure yet," he said. "Just wanted the space to be ready." It struck her then that he sounded like someone waiting for something, or someone, but she didn't press. Over the weeks, he planted lavender, rosemary, small tomatoes, and one stubborn row of lilies that refused to grow straight. He started coming home from work with soil-stained hands, bits of bark stuck to his sleeves, and in the evenings after dinner he'd sit outside until the light disappeared. They still spoke, still shared meals, still asked each other how their day had been, but now there was a silence between the lines, a softness, as if they were both holding something delicate between them that neither wanted to name. Laura began to help, not always but often. She'd water the rosemary while he trimmed the tomato vines. They'd argue about spacing. She'd tease him for fussing over the lilies. And slowly she began to understand. The garden wasn't a project. It was a confession. One night near the end of summer, he told her about his father. They were sitting under the porch light, wine in hand, the scent of lavender drifting up from the soil. "I used to help him in the yard," he said, "when I was little, before he got sick." She had never heard him talk about his father that way, not in over 2 decades of marriage. "He planted rows," he continued. "Everything straight, everything neat. When he got the diagnosis, he started letting things overgrow. Said nature was going to win anyway." Laura didn't interrupt, just listened. Greg rubbed his palms together. "I used to think I wasn't anything like him. But lately, I don't know." They sat there for a long time, quiet stretching between them, and then she reached over and held his hand. That fall, the garden kept blooming. Somehow the lilies straightened. The rosemary grew wild. The tomatoes shriveled and fell, but they didn't pull them out, just let them be. By winter, the garden went bare, as gardens do. But they still went out there, still sat on the bench, mugs steaming in the cold, sometimes wrapped in the same blanket. They didn't talk about what the garden was. Not exactly, but Laura knew now. It was where he went when words weren't enough, where memory lived in soil and rhythm and silence. And she noticed other things too. He didn't snap at small inconveniences anymore. He smiled when the neighbor's dog barked. He lingered longer over morning coffee. There was a stillness in him now, not absence, but peace. In the spring, he built a wooden trellis and painted it sky blue. It wasn't straight. She laughed at it. He told her he liked it better that way. They planted new things that year. Sunflowers, thyme, climbing roses. Laura began to write down what bloomed, what failed, what came back unexpectedly. They began talking about pulling out the old shed and turning it into a greenhouse. They hosted a dinner one evening with their children and close friends, setting the table outside between the rows of herbs. Their daughter said it smelled like something from childhood, like something permanent. Greg just smiled. And one evening, after dinner, as they sat in the garden with their hands covered in soil and their knees stiff from kneeling, he turned to her and said, "I think I just wanted a place where something could grow again." Laura looked around at the chaos of green, the uneven beds, the crooked trellis, and the wild scent of rosemary in the air. Then she looked at him. Her husband, not changed, but somehow returned. She leaned her head against his shoulder and said, "You made it." He smiled, not at the words, but at how true they felt. And when she looked at him again, she saw not just the man she'd married, but the boy who had learned to rake rows beside his father, the man who had quietly mourned without ceremony, the partner who now, in the most patient way, was showing her how to hold sorrow and hope in the same hand. She reached across the garden bed and took his dirt-covered fingers in hers. Some things, she thought, grow only when you stop trying to control them. This quiet, uneven, imperfect garden was proof of that. The next summer they expanded the beds, added raised boxes and pea gravel paths. Greg built a small bench under the old maple tree and painted it white. Laura started leaving books out there, half read and soft from the sun. Neighbors began stopping by, first to admire, then to ask questions, then to bring clippings and cuttings and old seeds. The garden, once a private act of remembering, was now a shared rhythm. Laura found herself waking up earlier too. Not to work, not to fix, but to be beside him. To kneel in soil. To feel the earth answer. One morning, as they sat in silence, a cardinal landed on the trellis. Greg pointed to it and said, "He used to say birds meant something." "Who?" she asked, though she already knew. "My dad," he said. "He believed they were messengers, not from anyone, just reminders." They sat there, neither speaking, and the bird didn't fly away. It stayed. Thank you for listening. Until the next heartbeat in a story, subscribe and stay for more love in every word.